Security forces in Mexico are working to restore order after the fall of the drug lord known as El Mencho. His killing set off a wave of violence, trapping Americans who were there visiting.
Mexican officials say the military located cartel leader Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, on Sunday by following a romantic partner to his hideout in Tapalpa, about 80 miles south of the Jalisco capital of Guadalajara.
In the early hours of February 22, 2026, a luxury cabin in the mountains of Tapalpa, Jalisco, burst into chaos as Mexican commandos descended from the sky. Inside, the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere was still half asleep. By the end of day, he was dead, and the girlfriend who led the army to him was gone. This is the story of how El Mencho was killed using the one person in the world close enough to find him.
The government estimates more than 70 people died in the attempt to capture the cartel boss known as El Mencho.
Tapalpa is a postcard, a pueblo mágico in the mountains south of Guadalajara, full of pine trees and rustic cabins. The Mexican government calls it a magical town. People go there to escape the city, to breathe, and that's why El Mencho went there.
We finally reached the exact spot where we think El Mencho, one of the world's biggest drug traffickers, was killed on Sunday morning. He was apparently holed up over there in a luxury bungalow in a country club.
His compound sat on a steep hillside on the edge of a gated luxury development called Tapalpa Country Club. 7 upscale cabins, a long, narrow, bumpy road that was the only way in or out, a black armored Ford Raptor in the carport, a sculpture of a stallion trampling a dragon at the front entrance. From the air, the property looked like any vacation rental. Secluded, expensive, hidden in the trees. Inside, it was something else entirely. The living rooms were decorated with the heads of exotic animals. A stuffed gazelle, a zebra skin rugs on the bedroom floors, handwritten Bible pages scattered around, wine glasses filled with pine cones. Stones at the edge of the property are engraved with images of St. Jude and the Virgin of Guadalupe. And in one of the rooms, piled in a corner, was the equipment for kidney dialysis. That's the detail that matters, because it tells you the most paranoid drug lord on earth wasn't moving anymore. He couldn't. He was 59 years old, sick, and tied to one location for the first time in his life. And someone had figured that out. Just on the other side of a hill, less than a kilometer away, retirees and tourists were sleeping in the gated cabins of Tapalpa Country Club. Some of them woke up that Sunday morning to the sound of automatic gunfire and helicopter rotors. They had no idea who they had been living next to.
For the first time, cartel kingpin El Mencho tonight is a $15 million man. That is the U.S. government reward just increased and placed on the head of Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho.
He's a very powerful trafficker in Mexico, and he has cells all over the world.
To understand why this raid mattered, you have to understand who was inside that cabin. Nemesio Ruben Oseguera Cervantes. Born July 17, 1966, in the avocado-growing hills of Michoacan. Born poor, dropped out of primary school, slipped across the U.S. border in the 1980s, got arrested a handful of times in California, and got deported back to Mexico in the early 1990s. That should have been the end of his story, but it was just the beginning. Back in Mexico, he started working as a security guard on the marijuana plantations of the Milenio Cartel, a drug trafficking outfit run by a family of avocado farmers turned narcos. Some reports even say he had briefly been a police officer at one point. He worked his way up the ranks. When the original Milenio bosses started getting arrested or killed off in the early 2000s, he stepped into the vacuum, and around 2009, he and his loyalists founded what would become the most aggressive criminal organization in modern Mexican history, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG. Under El Mencho, the CJNG didn't just sell drugs, it declared war on the Mexican state. The cartel grew at a speed nobody had ever seen before. By the mid-2020s, the DEA estimated CJNG had a presence in all 50 U.S. states and was operating in 21 of Mexico's 32. They moved fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine into America by the ton. They diversified into fuel theft, extortion, timeshare scams, and avocado protection rackets. One analyst told Al Jazeera the cartel's expansion strategy was modeled almost on Genghis Khan. Wipe out the opposition and use the destruction itself as a recruiting tool. If you join, you live. If you resist, this happens to you.
Mexico says it is on the offensive against a drug trafficking organization. That organization calls itself the New Generation Cartel of Jalisco. Authorities accuse the group of shooting down a Mexican military helicopter.
In 2015, his men shot down a Mexican Army helicopter using a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. 9 soldiers died. That same year, when the government launched Operation Jalisco to capture him, the CJNG burned 39 buses, 11 banks, and 16 gas stations across 20 different towns, just to cover his escape. 3 years later, his gunmen tried to kill the police chief of Mexico City, a man named Omar Garcia Harfuch, in a daylight ambush in the middle of the capital. Harfuch survived. He's now Mexico's national security minister, and he never forgot. By 2025, the U.S. State Department had a $15 million bounty on El Mencho's head. The Mexican government had 300 million pesos. The Trump administration had designated his cartel a foreign terrorist organization, opening the door for U.S. military involvement. The DEA had branded him Chicago's public enemy #1.
For the first time, cartel kingpin El Mencho tonight is a $15 million man. That is the U.S. government reward just increased and placed on the head of Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho. Such a huge bounty on such a physically insignificant man.
And he was still free. For more than a decade, the most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere had survived everything the Mexican Army and the United States government could throw at him. How? He built the most sophisticated security operation any cartel boss has ever assembled. 400 personal gunmen, an inner circle trained by ex-Colombian special forces, armored tank-style vehicles equipped with 6-barreled Gatling guns, shoulder-fired rocket launchers that could down helicopters, bomb-delivering drones, sometimes landmines. He almost never let a phone near him. He was terrified that a single GPS signal could give him away. A former FBI agent who spent decades hunting him said it best. Outside El Mencho's inner circle, almost no one even knew what he looked like. That was the man inside the cabin in Tapalpa. And what brought him down wasn't an army. It wasn't a drone strike. It was something far smaller, far more personal, and far more devastating.
El Mencho's wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, is under arrest on laundering charges and being held in this Mexico prison, where security has been tightened because she is suspected of running her husband's multi-billion-dollar drug empire.
Before there was a girlfriend, there was a wife. And without her, El Mencho would have been nobody. Her name was Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, born in 1963 in the same rural part of Michoacán where El Mencho grew up. She was one of 18 siblings in a family that had been farming, then trafficking, since the 1970s. Her family didn't just work in the drug trade, they built it. Rosalinda's family founded the Milenio Cartel, the very organization El Mencho would inherit. Her brother Abigail started a sister organization called Los Queens, the financial and money laundering wing that turned cartel cash into a clean empire of shopping malls, hotels, real estate agencies, restaurants, and even a tequila company. So when Rosalinda married El Mencho in 1996, it wasn't just a wedding, it was a merger. He brought the muscle, she brought the money. Together they built the CJNG into a billion-dollar criminal corporation that operated in all 50 U.S. states and 21 Mexican ones. People in the cartel called her La Jefa, the boss. And inside CJNG, that wasn't a nickname, it was a job title. According to the Mexican government, Rosalinda personally oversaw a network of more than 70 front businesses that laundered hundreds of millions of dollars in cartel profits. Restaurants, hotels, real estate firms, every clean dollar that came out of dirty cartel cash passed through her side of the operation. They had 3 children together, Ruben, Jessica, and Laisha. The empire seemed unbreakable, but by 2018, something had shifted. That May, Mexican Marines arrested Rosalinda for the first time on money laundering charges. She got out 3 months later, but according to leaked documents from Mexico's defense ministry, that was also the moment El Mencho started seeing someone else. In November 2021, Rosalinda was arrested again. This time, prosecutors had her on financial transactions tied to a car wash she ran in Puerto Vallarta. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While she was locked up, El Mencho's new relationship deepened. The leaked Mexican intelligence files placed his new partner inside the CJNG's regional structure, as far far back as October 2022. Rosalinda walked out of prison in February 2025, granted early release for good behavior. She was free for almost exactly 1 year before her husband was killed in a cabin where another woman was sleeping in his bed.
La identidad de la mujer que habría sido clave para localizar al líder del CJNG no fue revelada por las autoridades. Sin embargo, documentos oficiales permitieron conocer quién era una de las mujeres vinculadas afectivamente con el Mencho, al menos hasta 2022.
Almost nothing about Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo has ever been confirmed publicly. That's part of what makes her terrifying. What we know is this. She was the woman El Mencho was seeing while his wife was in prison. They had been together for about 3 years. They had no children. She moved through the upper social circles of Guadalajara and presented herself, by all public appearances, as a successful businesswoman. She kept a low profile, almost too low. There's no documented criminal record, no public arrest warrant, no confirmed sighting of her doing anything suspicious. Just photographs that Mexican military intelligence somehow obtained, and surveillance teams watching her properties in Zapopan and in Puerto Vallarta, the same Pacific resort city where Rosalinda had run her car wash. The first time Guadalupe's name appeared in the public record was October 2022. A hacker collective called Guacamaya Leaks dumped a massive cache of stolen documents from Mexico's National Defense Secretariat, the same agency that would eventually kill her boyfriend. Buried inside the leak was her name. The Defense Ministry had been tracking her for years, identifying her as part of the CJNG's regional structure. But the leak didn't say what she actually did. It just said she was there, connected, in the room, the kind of person who sits in a quiet, expensive house in Guadalajara, who never appears in public, but whose phone lights up every time the most wanted man in Mexico needs to disappear for a weekend. Here's the thing about a relationship like that. It can't be casual. A man with 400 bodyguards and a $15 million bounty doesn't have casual. Every meeting has to be coordinated, every car ride planned, every safe house swept, which means every time Guadalupe traveled, every time she met him, every move she made became a thread someone could pull. Mexican intelligence had been pulling that thread for years. They just hadn't yanked yet. Every empire has a crack. El Mencho's was inside his own body. For 15 years, his entire survival strategy had been built on one simple rule. Never stay anywhere long enough for anyone to find you. Move constantly. Use rotating safe houses across 4 states. Trust nobody outside the inner circle. It turned him into a ghost. But by his late 50s, that ghost was getting sick. By his late 50s, the man who had built one of the most violent organizations on Earth was suffering from late-stage kidney disease. His kidneys were failing. He needed regular dialysis to stay alive. And dialysis isn't something you can do in the back of a moving SUV. It's something you do in a fixed location, on a schedule, with equipment, with medical supplies stockpiled nearby. Investigators who searched the Tapalpa cabin after the raid found exactly what they expected. Piles of dialysis equipment, a small pharmacy of kidney medications, and bottles of glutathione, the antioxidant used to slow renal failure. The very thing that made El Mencho almost impossible to catch. His constant movement, his rotating safe houses, his refusal to stay anywhere long enough for anyone to track him was the thing his health no longer allowed. He was forced to settle, forced to keep certain properties for the long term, forced to come back to the same beds, the same kitchens, the same hidden mountain compounds. Over and over again, the wolf had finally been chained to a place. And on top of that, there was the loneliness. Rosalinda was gone, first to prison, then to a kind of half-distance after her release. The kingdom she had helped him build was crumbling around him. His brother Abraham had been arrested in 2024. His son Ruben, known as El Menchito, once seen as the cartel's heir apparent, was sitting in a U.S. federal prison after being extradited in 2020. His son-in-law was in a California jail. So when El Mencho wanted comfort, when he wanted the illusion of normalcy, when he wanted a few days in the woods that felt like a real life, he wanted Guadalupe. And there was the man who brought her to him, a trusted associate, a driver, someone Guadalupe used as the go-between for these meetings, because she couldn't exactly drive into a CJNG compound by herself. His name, according to later Mexican government statements, was Jose N., protected for legal reasons, but a known logistics operator inside the network. Jose was the loose thread. Mexican military intelligence identified him. They started watching him. They followed his car. They monitored his calls and contacts. And when he eventually picked Guadalupe up to take her on a particular weekend trip, the Mexican army was watching every mile of the road.
The military arrived in helicopters and in trucks. He took flight across these fields and through these compounds just ahead of us here, and locals say he was killed or at least shot somewhere along here.
February 20th, 2026, Guadalupe got into a vehicle in Guadalajara and headed south into the mountains. Her driver took her along the winding 2-hour route to Tapalpa. She had no idea that 20,000 feet above her, an American Predator drone, the same kind of unmanned aircraft the U.S. military had used to bomb ISIS fighters in Iraq, was tracking her vehicle. As she arrived at the gated entrance of Tapalpa Country Club, the driver waved through. The car climbed the long, narrow, bumpy road up to the compound called Cabañas La Loma, 7 cabins on a steep hillside dotted with pine trees. The exact spot the U.S. Treasury Department had sanctioned back in 2017 for providing material assistance to CJNG. The exact spot where her boyfriend had been hiding. They spent the night together. Sources later described it as a romantic getaway, a weekend escape. The cabin had unmade beds, a half-eaten cookout on the grill outside, an opened pack of Skittles on the bedspread of one of the rooms. Just a normal weekend, except for the fact that one of the people inside was the most hunted man in the world. February 21st, 2026, Guadalupe and her driver got back in their car and left. They drove down the bumpy mountain road. They passed back through the country club gate. They headed home. They never made it. Not far from the property, Mexican military intelligence personnel intercepted the car. They didn't arrest her. They didn't make any noise. They simply confirmed what they needed to confirm, that El Mencho was still inside the cabin, that he hadn't left, that he had stayed behind with his security circle. Then they let her go. That same afternoon, an army surveillance drone began circling the cabin compound. It recorded the activity of bodyguards. It documented exactly which cabin El Mencho was sleeping in. The U.S. Predator drone, hovering nonstop at 20,000 feet, fed the location data into a joint intelligence package. The CIA and FBI handed Mexican military intelligence a precise GPS-locked target. By Saturday night, the operation was set. Every piece had been planned for months. The intelligence on Guadalupe's driver, the patient surveillance, the choice to wait until she had physique. Ellie left the property before moving on the target. None of it was a tip from a snitch. It was a long, quiet, methodical operation that came together with surgical precision. 6 military helicopters were pre-positioned in states adjacent to Jalisco: Colima, Nayarit, Michoacán. Not in Jalisco itself, because Jalisco was the CJNG's home turf, and the cartel had eyes everywhere. The Mexican Air Force quietly readied reconnaissance assets. Special Forces units packed gear and prepared to move before dawn. Inside the cabin, El Mencho hosted what was later described as an all-night party. There was a carne asada cookout outside, green onions on the grill, music, wine, the signs of a man who, for one night, felt safe enough to relax. He had no idea that the most expensive intelligence operation in the history of the U.S.-Mexico drug war was, at that exact moment, closing in on his bedroom window.
The gunfight was apparently so ferocious that even now you can see a forest fire consuming the side of the mountain over there.
February 22nd, 2026, Sunday, before sunrise. The first sound was the helicopters. Mexican commandos came in from above, deliberately, to maintain the element of surprise. Coming up the only road would have given the cartel sentries a 15-minute warning. Coming from the sky gave them seconds. Special forces hit the ground around the cluster of cabins and started moving. The compound security detail, about 10 of El Mencho's most loyal men, including operators trained by ex-Colombian special forces, opened fire almost immediately. High-caliber rifles, heavy weapons, the kind of firepower most national militaries don't carry. The first firefight broke out in the open ground between the cabins. Bullet impacts, shattered terracotta roof tiles, spent .50 caliber shell casings rolled across doorways like drop pennies. A large arched window in one of the cabins exploded outward in a shower of glass. As the soldiers advanced, El Mencho was awake. He was wounded already, or about to be. He grabbed 2 members of his personal security and bolted out the back of the cabin into the wooded slope behind the property. The 2 engraved stones, St. Jude and the Virgin of Guadalupe, marked the boundary between the manicured grounds and the wild forest beyond. He crossed that line and ran. Behind him, the firefight was intensifying. CJNG gunmen tried to shoot a Mexican military helicopter out of the sky. They actually hit it. The helicopter, damaged, was forced to make an emergency landing at a nearby army base. Just over a decade earlier, this same inner circle had downed an army helicopter and killed 9 soldiers. They were trying to do it again. This time, the army didn't break. The pilot survived. The crew was extracted, and the assault on the cabin kept moving forward. A specialized pursuit team peeled off from the main assault and chased El Mencho into the woods. The terrain was steep, thick with undergrowth, almost impossible to move through quickly. He didn't get far. He was sick, he was wounded, and he was in his late 50s. Special Forces personnel found him hiding in the brush, a few hundred meters from the cabin. He was badly wounded. His 2 bodyguards beside him were also bleeding. He raised his weapon and fired on the soldiers. They returned fire, and the man who had built the most violent cartel in modern Mexican history finally went down. 2 more cartel members were captured alive. 8 gunmen had been killed in the assault. An extraction team landed within minutes. They loaded El Mencho onto a helicopter, along with his 2 wounded sicarios, and lifted off. The plan was to fly him to a medical facility in Jalisco, then transfer him to Mexico City for full custody and prosecution. He never made it. The man who had survived helicopter ambushes, federal raids, U.S. drone surveillance, and the largest manhunt in Mexican history, died on the floor of an army helicopter mid-flight. The $15 million bounty was effectively paid before he hit the tarmac. His body arrived at Mexico City International Airport later that same day. Within hours, it was being processed at the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Organized Crime. The next morning, the Federal Attorney General's office formally confirmed what everyone in Mexico already knew. DNA testing matched. The most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere was dead.
Mexico's defense secretary said El Mencho and 2 bodyguards were wounded in a gunfight with the military, and he died during an airlift to Mexico City.
The CJNG's response was instant. Within hours of the announcement, the cartel set fire to Mexico. Approximately 250 roadblocks went up across the country, hijacked cargo trucks, buses, and private vehicles, all torched and dragged across highways. The fires spread through Jalisco, Michoacán, Guanajuato, Colima, Tamaulipas, Zacatecas, Aguascalientes, and Sinaloa. In Guadalajara alone, at least 20 active blockades shut down major arteries. In Puerto Vallarta, smoke rose over the resort city as explosions ripped through the streets. Convenience stores burned, gas stations burned, shopping centers burned.
Wow, so he's saying it was a 2-meter deep trench that they'd carved out of the road, about a meter wide, 2 meters deep, to stop any kind of troops coming in, armored vehicles, to rescue their big boss.
People at the Guadalajara airport sprinted in panic across the terminal. A Jalisco governor told everyone to stay inside. The Mexican government deployed 10,000 troops to 20 different states. By the end of it, more than 70 people were dead. 25 National Guard soldiers, 34 suspected cartel members, 2 government employees, and at least 1 civilian caught in the crossfire. Coordinating the retaliation was a man called El Tuli. His real name was Hugo H., El Mencho's right-hand man, top financial operator, and chief confidant. From the town of El Grullo, about 100 kilometers from where his boss had just been killed, El Tuli put a 20,000 peso bounty, about $1,100 US, on every Mexican soldier or National Guard member his men killed in revenge. Mexican intelligence found him by that evening. A parachute regiment dropped into El Grullo. He tried to flee, opened fire on officers, and was killed in the ensuing clash. The same day, his boss died. Within 48 hours, the leadership of the CJNG was gutted. El Mencho, dead. El Tuli, dead. El Menchito, already in U.S. federal prison. By March, the Wall Street Journal was reporting that Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, Rosalinda's son from a previous relationship, El Mencho's stepson, had emerged as the cartel's new leader. By April, El País confirmed it. The kingdom didn't fall. It just changed kings. and the cartel began the slow, bloody process of fracturing into regional factions, with experts at the Brookings Institution warning of a new and more unpredictable wave of violence, just months before Mexico was set to host the FIFA World Cup. On March 3rd, El Mencho was buried in Zapopan. They put him in a golden casket. A man who grew up dirt poor in the avocado hills of Michoacan was being interred in solid gold, while soldiers stood guard outside the cemetery. And Guadalupe, she vanished. From the moment she walked out of that cabin on February 21st, she has not been publicly seen, photographed, interviewed, or charged. There is no arrest warrant in her name. There is no statement from her or her lawyers. The Mexican government's official position is that she was an unwitting target, surveilled without her knowledge, used as a passive lead, never directly involved. Defense Secretary Ricardo Trevilla refused to even confirm her name during the press conference where the operation was announced. The internet is less convinced. Some people online say she flipped for the bounty. Some say she was a U.S. plant from the very beginning. Some say she's in witness protection now. Some say what's left of CJNG is hunting her. Some say all four are true at once. Nobody knows. And the Mexican government has shown no interest in clearing it up. What we do know is that on March 16th, the Mexican army announced the arrest of the driver, Jose N., the trusted man who had transported Guadalupe to the Tapalpa cabin on February 20th, was officially detained. They seized weapons, drugs, and a vehicle. He was handed over to the Federal Attorney General's office. The arrest barely made international news. By that point, the operation that killed El Mencho had been ranked among the most significant blows against organized crime in modern Mexican history, comparable only to the recapture of El Chapo nearly a decade earlier. The most paranoid drug lord on earth had built the most sophisticated security operation any cartel had ever assembled. 400 gunmen, ex-Colombian special forces, armored vehicles, rocket launchers, drones, landmines. He survived helicopter ambushes. He survived federal offensives. He survived a 15-year manhunt by 2 different national governments. In the end, none of it mattered. He was killed because of a weekend with his girlfriend. There's a sculpture at the front entrance of his Tapalpa hideout. A stallion trampling a dragon. He probably saw himself as the stallion. The Mexican army was the dragon. But that's not the part of the story that haunts. The part that haunts is this. A man with all the money in the world, all the firepower in the world, all the loyal soldiers in the world, was lonely. He wanted somebody to spend a weekend with. He wanted carne asada on the grill and an unmade bed and another human being beside him. And the moment he allowed himself that one human thing, that one ordinary, vulnerable, perfectly forgivable desire, was the moment the most expensive manhunt in modern history finally caught up to him. Guadalupe walked out of that cabin on a Saturday morning in February. By Sunday, the kingdom was burning, and the queen had disappeared into the smoke.